Hello, everyone, and welcome to EnterpriseNG Conf. My name is Taylor Dolezal, and I'm a senior developer advocate at HashiCorp. I'm mostly focused on all things Terraform, Waypoint, Kubernetes, application delivery, developer experience, and much, much more. If there's anything that's troubling you around your infrastructure or your applications, I'd love to have a conversation with you and find out how we can make things a little bit better. Today is going to be quite a fun session. I'm not going to have any slides today, and we're just going to go straight through code. We're going to be using TypeScript to stand up a EKS cluster, an Elastic Kubernetes Service cluster, in AWS. And we'll be doing so with TypeScript. So that's going to be quite a lot of fun. Some prerequisites that you'll need to install are the CDK TF tool, Terraform. You'll want to make sure that you have the correct credentials to log into AWS, and a few other things as well. I'm going to share out some source code for the session, so please be on the lookout for that if you want to understand or learn more about what's required to make all of this happen. But you're going to see a lot of that happen today. We're going to be writing the code to do all of this. So without further ado, I'm going to get things started. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out via Twitter, LinkedIn, or anywhere else on that front. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Whoops. Don't want to share a video file. Let's go ahead and share a screen instead. All right, cool. So there is a lot that we're going to go through today. I won't have time to hit everything in detail. So again, please feel free to ask questions asynchronously. Otherwise, I'll try to dive into as much as possible. And I'm going to fast forward through a couple of these parts because just standing up an EKS cluster alone takes about 10 to 15 minutes. So we'll give you some time back on that front. Okay, so first off, let's go ahead and make a directory that we're going to put all this code into. We're going to be calling that EKS in functions because essentially that's what we're doing. We're creating an EKS cluster by using functions and creators and constructors in TypeScript. Okay, so as mentioned before, there is that CDK TF CLI tool. And with that tool, there are a lot of commands that you can execute. One of them is init, which allows us to bootstrap everything that we're going to be using today. So let's walk through what we're creating here. We are setting a flag for the template, so we're going to be using TypeScript for that. Next up, we're going to be using project name. So for that, we're just going to call this EKS in functions with hyphens separating those space characters. Project description is next, and let's create an EKS cluster using TypeScript. I want it to be straightforward and to the point. Lastly, we're going to put -- local because we're going to be storing the state locally. Really good for demos, not good for production. And I highly recommend checking out Terraform Cloud or using a remote backend to store your state in something like S3 or something that's not on your computer. If you store it on your computer, it will work, but it becomes difficult when working with teams. And then who hasn't been prone to spill coffee on their machine or drop it at some point in time, or even have a hard drive fail? You know, things can happen, and better to have that state somewhere versioned where it's safe and can be backed up and replicated and taken care of in all of the ways in which it needs to. Okay, so we have instantiated everything. As you can see, here are some of the commands that we can run with the CDK TF tool. We'll walk through some of these today, mostly the synth command. I might walk through the diff command, but most certainly the deploy command. And then once I have this all shut down and y'all are gone, I'm going to run destroy because I don't want this to cost me any money. Okay. Wonderful. So let's go ahead and clear this out. Let's open up VS Code so we can walk through what's going on here. Okay, so as you can see, we have a lot of things that were pre-generated for us. We have tests, we have node modules, and we have some other configuration here. Let's take a look at the cdktf.json file. Now, CDK, what does that stand for? That's the Cloud Development Kit. We've worked closely here at HashiCorp with folks at Amazon, and the CDK team so that we can run things through CloudFormation, interact with different APIs, and just kind of work better together. You can also use HCL, the HashiCorp configuration language, to set all of these things up. And that might be better for you if you just care about that configuration. But if you want to use your favorite programming language, you can do so. We support several today, including TypeScript, Python, Go, C#, Ruby, and as more get added to the JSII library, you'll be able to use those as well. So quite a few languages for you to choose from. Okay, so we're going to go ahead with this JSON file. We're going to change a few things because not everything here is what we want. And I also don't like how that's aligned, so let's go ahead and fix that too. Okay, wonderful. Okay. So what we're going to want to do is I would type these things out, but I'm just going to go ahead and grab them from a buffer that I have over here. And I'm going to define my Terraform providers as such. The reason I do this and the reason that I pin them to the exact version is because I want to have that certainty in knowing that I'm pulling down exactly what I need at the right time that I need it. If even if someone were to push up a minor version and that wasn't exactly the same and created a breaking change unknowingly, I wouldn't have that level of certainty. So make sure to pin your providers, whether you use HCL or TypeScript with the CDK for Terraform. Okay, wonderful. One other thing that we're going to change here is this app declaration. I'm going to change this to use npx tsnode main.ts just because we've seen some issues in terms of dependencies. This will be the default behavior in upcoming versions of the CDK for Terraform with TypeScript. All right. Next up, we have these two modules that we're going to be using. With Terraform, you have the ability to use providers, which allow you to use resources and declare those within the cloud or the provider of your choice, whether it be AWS or Kubernetes or GitHub or PagerDuty. You have this ability to interact and work with these APIs and these systems. Each provider unlocks brand new resources for you to use and to declare. Terraform is great because it's declarative. What you want, if you want to set your channel on your TV to 5, you can do that rather than using the volume control to kind of modify the state as it currently is. Terraform allows just a static way of setting something, which is quite nice. Next up are modules, and modules are kind of like blueprints for putting things together. I don't want to have to go in and declare all of those resources for the VPC. You know, if I have to, I have to, right? But I have this ability to use a pre-created module that exists publicly on GitHub and in the Terraform registry. So I can just pull it down and use it. I can just declare some values and things that I want to use, and then we're good to go. Same thing with our Eks cluster. So so that's our configuration, and that's really it. So what we're going to do is CDK-TF and get, which is going to pull down these providers and these modules. We can see that created a .gen folder here. And then as these get downloaded and these the code actually gets created on the fly for interacting with each of these things. So we can see in modules, you know, here's what the EKS file looks like in TypeScript. You can see that it has all these accessor functions and interface declarations, constructors, and defaults in here. Same with the VPC as well. We can also see that for the providers that we downloaded, today we're only really going to care about AWS, but I pulled these down too, these other providers down as well, because those are used by the module that we have pulled down. Okay, so let's switch over to our main.ts file. And here we can see that, you know, this is pretty bare. This looks good though. Where we're going to define our resources and work with everything is right within here, actually. So we will be pulling in and importing some more things as well, but this is really the crux and the meat and potatoes of what we're looking for here. Okay, so I'm going to want to pull in a couple of things, and I'm going to start with the AWS provider. I'm not going to be sourcing it from this folder. I'm actually going to want to pull it in from the gen folder. And then let's do providers. and AWS. So that is going to give me the ability to call AWS and all of the resources that I want to spin up today. I'm also going to want to pull in the VPC and EKS items as well. Let me space these out. I'm actually going to go ahead and just grab this from my buffer and just make sure I don't foobar anything. Okay. All right. So we can see that these are all the dependencies that we're going to be using today. We're using the Aws Provider, the VPC, and EKS modules. Next up, let's go ahead and declare some constants that we're going to be using, like the CIDR for the network we're going to create with the VPC in Amazon. Whoops. I'm going to go ahead and use these here. Okay, so first off, we want a project name because that's going to be something we can use throughout. That's one of the biggest things, one of the most difficult things to do as you program is find the right name, right? Just cache invalidation and naming, very difficult to do. So let's pick a name and stick with it. For that, it's going to be EKS in functions. Next, we're going to create a CIDR that we're going to want to use. And for that, let's use this one. This is going to give us a big block of IP addresses so that we have enough space to put all of our applications into. Okay, wonderful. Next up, we're going to want to go ahead and declare our AWS provider. And by doing so, we can just say new AWS provider, this AWS, and then we'll set the region. What's really nice about VS Code and TypeScript is that as you hover over each of these things, you can read a little bit about them and see where things are or get errors that are coming back. Like right now, it's saying I'm not using the VPC or EKS functionalities or variables, but don't worry, we're gonna change that here shortly. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and create a VPC. Whoops. Okay. So with this VPC, I'm going to want to set it to a constant because I want to declare a whole bunch of things, and I want to use the VPC itself as well because there's a couple things that we'll want to use as far as the EKS cluster goes. So first off, let's give this a name, and let's give this our project name. Cool. Great. We're going to give it a CIDR, and CIDR is what we're going to call that. Great. We're going to go ahead and set our availability zones, private subnets, public subnets, and then a couple other things as well. So let me go ahead and grab these from the counter over here that I have, or my buffer, just to make sure I have everything typed out correctly. And then I'll walk through it here really quickly with y'all. Okay. So we have our availability zones set up, US West 2, A, B, and C. We're going to want to stand this up in 3 different availability zones so that we have that high availability. We're also going to want to set our private subnets and our public subnets, and I've separated these by 100 so that it's easy to see and differentiate which one is which. Next up, within your public subnets in this networking space, Kubernetes requires some special tags when it comes to AWS. And those are the role, internal ELB and ELB, and then the name of the cluster, and if it's shared or owned. There are a couple different differentiations here that are important to make note of. And that's really public. That's where you want to stand up load balancers if you make a Kubernetes service or an ingress. If you don't set these tags, if you tell Kubernetes to keep things in an internal network space, it might not know where to put those things. So it's always best to be explicit when setting these tags. We also turn on the DNS host names and our NAT gateway as well, because that's going to help all of the connectivity that we want to set up today. All right. And then lastly, let's go ahead and get some configuration for our EKS cluster. So again, I'll make sure that I'm putting this in the right spot. And here we'll create this new EKS cluster here. Again, we're going to want to use project name. And again, you can hover over each of these to see what is required. Or, again, if this is a string, how do we work with these things? We're going to want to set our cluster version to the latest that's offered right now, and that's 1.21. Next up, we're going to use subnets, and we're going to define those subnets based on that VPC constant that we had before. And you'll notice that there's this construct called a token. A token allows for this Terraform value here. This is an output from Terraform. Terraform provides outputs after things have been stood up. The problem is that this is a string, and Subnets is expecting an array of strings, which we don't have here based on the differences in types. But if we use token.asList, that's a construct that allows us to transform things into the right state and to use them within this constructor, this declaration. We can see that this VPC ID output, we don't have to cast that because it's already a string, so we're good. We don't want to write this Kubernetes config out to disk because, we really couldn't use it, and it'd be better to just use the AWS CLI to handle that. And then we don't really want to manage the AWS auth either, just because we're not going to be standing up any applications immediately today. And then finally, with worker groups, we want to spin up three machines, three EC2 machines. Make those M5 larges, and then make that the auto scaling group, make that no bigger than 5. Cool. So that is it. Honestly, this is going to stand up a network, a Kubernetes cluster, and get us ready to deploy applications. Funny enough that we use this code to stand up the infrastructure that we're then going to run more code on. Really enjoy the tongue-in-cheek there. Okay, so let's go ahead and run CDK-TF synth. This is going to synthesize all of the TypeScript code that we created, create a brand new folder, and then dump that out into a JSON file that then Terraform can use. So essentially transpiling the code that you've written into something that Terraform can take up and work with. Okay, wonderful. So that has been generated. If you want to take a look at it, you can take a look here in this cdk-tf.out. We'll take a look at the stacks folder, AKS and functions, and then finally you can see all of the JSON here based on what we've created. You could even navigate all the way down to this folder and just use Terraform to execute this in terms of like initialize, plan, apply, etc. So, but we won't be doing that today. Okay, so we have initialized, we have gotten our dependencies, we have synthesized all of the code that we've written and gotten it ready for prime time. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and run a diff, which is kind of like a Terraform plan. So this is going to tell us what the difference is between the code that we've written and synthesized and what is going to be created by the CDK for Terraform. So let's go ahead and wait. It does go ahead and synthesize it on its own, but it's always great to run that synth command on your own to make sure that all of the code is exactly where you want it to be. All right, and it's going to go ahead and initialize it here. And we can see it's creating all of these folders and files and getting everything primed so that we can actually start working with it. So as you can see, we have 50 different resources that are going to be created. Great, wonderful. So now let's go ahead and deploy this. You can add a -- auto approve, which we call Terraform YOLO in the business, but absolutely don't recommend that you do so, just because it's unless it's a demo and you don't really mind about anything on that front. But again, just good to always inspect what you expect, what is going on with the situation. It's nice here to see that you have that diff. You know how many resources are going to be created. Here it's going to plan and make sure everything looks good. Then it's going to ask me if it's okay to go ahead and actually stand up this infrastructure. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And then just like that, we have kicked off our stack and it is deploying in the cloud. We're going to tune back in here in just a second, and when we have our cluster up and running, and I'll show you that everything is ready for prime time and ready to go. All right, so let's go ahead and get that configuration for our cluster. We can see that by calling the AWS CLI, there is a command that ECAS gives us that lets us pull in our Kubernetes config. Now, again, I recommend doing this as infrastructure as code and not really using it directly as the best way to make sure that things don't change. But this is really good for inspecting and seeing what's going on with your cluster. Let's go ahead and get some namespaces. And so we can see that we're ready for prime time now. We've set up our Kubernetes cluster. We've set up a whole bunch of nodes, and we're ready to get going, which is fantastic. So we used code to spin up infrastructure that we'll then use to run more code on. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching this presentation. That was a whirlwind here in just about 20 minutes that we got through. I hope you all enjoyed it. I can't wait to hear and see what you all make with the CDK for Terraform. And as always, if you have any questions or you want to reach out and chat further, I'd be more than happy to talk with you. Have a wonderful rest of your day and hope to hear from you. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.
Hi, I'm Joe Weems. Thanks for checking out this video from EnterpriseNG 2021. Online conferences were great, but it's time to get back in person. See your old friends, make some new ones, and take your career to the next level. Head over to ng-conf.org to get your ticket. See you there.